Before we jump into today's episode, I want to tell you about something new and something cool that we just made for you. I wrote it myself. Now, here's my assumption. If you are listening to this podcast, it probably means that you want to build long-term wealth with a rental real estate portfolio, and you would probably like to do it with some creative financing. And as I talk to people who want to do that, I know a lot of questions come up, and I thought there's really no great single resource that really captures the entire picture of how that works. But I have solved that problem because I have written a new PDF that is just for you, and it's called the Step-by-Step Guide to Buying Your First or Next Rental Property Without Relying on a Lender to Approve You for a Loan. Like I said, I wrote this thing myself, and if I do say so myself, it's pretty thorough. And in this, you're going to learn a few things. I'm going to teach you about the 3 key strategies to find and negotiate quality off-market real estate deals that nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm going to teach you about what I call the yeses framework for getting off-market sellers to accept your offers. And then I'm also going to teach you the 11 simple steps that you need to take to get your first or your next deal accepted without needing to go to a bank and apply for a loan and just hope that they give it to you. So if you would like to get this free downloadable PDF, just go to rentalwealthguide.com and you can download it right now. rentalwealthguide.com and get your download of the step-by-step guide to buying your first or next rental property without relying on a lender to approve you for a loan. Now, on with the show.
When you're trying to buy a property off market from a seller, when do you start negotiating? The answer will likely surprise you, and it's probably far earlier than you think. In today's episode, we're going to discuss when and how those negotiations with the seller begin, whether you are ready for them or not. Cue the theme song and let's dive right in.
Successful real estate investing isn't all about we buy houses and motivated sellers. That's the lowbrow approach, and it gives real estate investing a slimy reputation. Gross. There is a better way, a more genuine human approach. We are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, and this is Sleaze Free Real Estate Investing.
This is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. Welcome to episode number 25 of Sleaze Free Real Estate Investing, a show for those of us who never felt at home in the we buy houses crowd. In this show, we take a stand against what we call the lowbrow approach. This is the mainstream guru seminar distressed seller approach that ends up giving real estate investors a slimy reputation. And instead, we discuss the strategies, tactics, and philosophies that we call the thoughtful way, an enlightened approach to real estate entrepreneurship that focuses on constantly sharpening the sophisticated real estate entrepreneur's 3 most critical capabilities: seller relation skills, deal architecture skills, and opportunity vision. When all 3 of these capabilities are successfully in motion, you can make an excellent living today and build long-term wealth while creating value for everybody that you touch along the way. Show notes for today's episode are at thoughtfulre.com/E25. Please do yourself and do us a huge favor by hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. Just do that right now. If you would, please, then that way you'll always know when the next episode comes out. And the better subscriber numbers actually helps us spread the message of our podcast to others. Now, in the last 2 episodes, we discussed something we call opportunity vision. These are the critical skills of being able to see all the angles of possibility in a deal and knowing how to craft the deal in a way that squeezes the maximum value out of that possibility that you identified. So if you have not listened to those already, go back and take a listen to episodes 23 and 24. And in today's main course, we're going to discuss negotiations and why they actually begin in the real estate acquisition process earlier than you might think. But first, a little food for thought. After all, we are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, right? So we like to feed our minds with things to think about. And here's something for you to think about today that we're thinking about today. And that is the topic of being present. Today, actually, as I record this, is Christmas Eve. And whether you celebrate Christmas or not, I think you're going to be able to relate to what I am talking about here. The other day, I was talking to a few fellow entrepreneurs about kind of their plans for this holiday season, their goals actually as well. And there were multiple of us on this small group of entrepreneurs talking together, this small call, who had the same objective, which was to stay fully present during these holidays, to really show up for our families and friends and give them all of us. Why is this so easy to say, but harder to do? It's because we're entrepreneurs, and we're thoughtful entrepreneurs at that. So we're always thinking. And that doesn't mean we're thinking about problems we need to solve. Sometimes we are, of course, but oftentimes we're thinking about things that we're really excited about and passionate about. So we might not even want to really turn it off because we enjoy that process of getting lost in thought about something that we're really excited about and getting just so wrapped up in it that time flies in the most gratifying kind of way. That's sort of the joy and intoxication of entrepreneurship. But if we don't find a way to turn it off, are our families and our friends really getting all of us and getting the best of us? No, they're not. And that's truly doing them a disservice. So whether it's the holidays right now as you listen to this or not, be conscious about the next time that you are going to fully show up, fully present for your family and friends. Maybe it's this coming weekend, maybe it's just tonight, maybe it's at a upcoming family event. But when is the next time that you are going to consciously and deliberately switch your thoughtful brain off for a while to be there for them 100%? And remember, there's actually a side benefit to this too. While we don't often appreciate this truth, turning that brain off for a while actually benefits us too. We need to recharge in order to be our best selves as well. And that is today's food for thought. All right, moving on to today's main course. And today's main course is on the topic within the category of thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship of negotiation. The question posed here is, when do you start negotiating with an off-market seller? I want to tell you a quick story. A few years ago, I sent a letter to a woman named Robin, and she owned a single-family home in a great high-demand neighborhood in my city. And Robin sent me an email shortly after receiving the letter and said, "Hey, Jeff, I got your letter. I'd love to talk with you about this, but I can't sell the property now. It's going to be about a year until I can actually sell it. And I'll get back in touch with you then. Just wanted to say hi and let you know. I'll talk to you then. Thanks." And so I wrote back right away and I said, "Robin, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for reaching out to me. I completely understand. And I'm in no rush on my end so that I can, kind of get my ducks in a row and do a little thinking and planning. What is your phone number? I'd love to just ask you a couple questions. And then that way I can be ready whenever the time is right for you." And she wrote back to me and she said, "Great, thanks. I'll talk to you in a few months." She didn't answer my question about giving me her phone number. So a couple months went by and I emailed her again. I said, "Hey, Robin, how's it going? Just checking in to see how things are going." And she wrote back and she said, "Hey, things are great. We're getting closer to when we can sell the property. I'll let you know then." And I said, "Great. Can you give me your phone number? I'd love to just chat with you." And she said, didn't respond with the phone number again. This happened over and over and over again for about a year. So probably 6 times in the course of a year, every couple months, we would have this same exchange. Very friendly. I would check in with her, ask her for her phone number. She would always respond to me, but never give me her phone number. And then one day, my phone rang, and it was a phone number that the caller ID didn't mean anything to me. So I picked it up, and there was Robin on the other end of the line. I was so excited because I thought, my goodness, I finally got her phone number now, and I'm actually talking to her on the phone. And she said, "Hey, it's time now. I'd love to chat with you. Can I meet you at the house and walk you through it?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And I showed up, and she and her husband were there, and they gave me a tour of the house. And she said, "Jeff, I get letters all the time, but yours felt different to me. And I decided that you're the one that I was willing to work with." And I appreciated our email exchanges over the last several months. So if you can give me $350,000 for this house, it's yours. Now, I saw tons of opportunity with this property, right? This is my opportunity vision, episodes 23 and 24 that we just wrapped up. I saw tons of opportunity with this property, and that included things like a basement apartment. The zoning would allow a second unit on this property. finishing the attic, taking a lot more of the footprint of this house and making more out of it. And I felt $350 was actually a very reasonable price to pay. So I wrote it up at $350 and put it in contract. And ultimately I bought it. I renovated it. I put about $200,000 into this property, and it went from being a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with $1,100 a month in rent to being 2 units, a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, and a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment, generating $4,400 a month in rent. I paid $345,000 for it. I put about $200 into it, and it appraised at $792,000 after my renovation. So it was a great win. But the question is, what was the, quote, negotiation in this case? Robin and I didn't go back and forth on price. When did we start negotiating? Is this just a rare deal that didn't actually involve negotiating? Do those deals even exist? Well, let's set that aside. We'll come back to Robin in a few minutes. So what is negotiation? Before we can answer this question of when does negotiating really start, we have to step back a little bit, because we can't discuss negotiating and when it begins unless we have agreement on what negotiating is. I need to give you a disclaimer. We could spend days, talking about this topic of negotiation alone. The goal here today is not to fully explore this topic of negotiation. That would be way out of the scope of what we're talking about today. But rather, the point of this is to create a common understanding of what negotiation is, which we can then use for our conversation about when it starts. There is so much more to talk about with negotiation, and trust me when I say we will unpack that conversation in the episodes of Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing over the course of the next several months. Most people, suffice it to say, do not really understand what negotiation actually is. I decided to see what Google would return when I typed in the question, what is negotiation? And the default definition they gave me was something that I actually didn't hate as much as I expected to. I thought that the definition coming back from Google might be much more off track from how I see it, but it wasn't too off track. Google's answer to that question was, it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. Okay, well, I think that's pretty good, but I'm going to revise this in a couple important ways. And instead of a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement, I'm going to say it's a dance of multiple interactions, not just a discussion. It's a dance of multiple interactions between people that leads toward agreement, okay? Now, I just said it leads towards agreement. I didn't say it leads towards an agreement. Let's stop and just take a look at that for a second, because there is a difference between agreement and an agreement. Agreement is a state of being. It's a state of two people being aligned. An agreement is a noun. It's a conscious mutual acceptance on a topic. Like you and I can be in agreement that being nice to people is a good thing, but we don't have to have an agreement about how we're going to do that. You see the difference between agreement, a state of being, and an agreement, a noun. And what I want you to think about is to stop focusing so much on an agreement and focus more on agreement, the state of being in alignment with somebody else. That state of being is built of everything between those two people. An agreement is something that two people decide. Agreement between two people is built on everything that's happening in the interactions and the dance that's happening between those two people. And these are not often conscious agreements. Not all agreements have to be named agreements, but there is agreement happening all the time around you, whether you're thinking of it as agreement and negotiation or not. So here's a big idea that I want you to focus on. Often the best, most powerful, and beneficial negotiations that you'll ever find yourself in are ones in which the other person does not even realize that they are negotiating. Okay? That is not to say that you've pulled the wool over their eyes and tricked them into doing something they don't realize they're doing. But what I'm saying is that when you are leading a dance with you and another person, you know that you are effectively negotiating. You are effectively creating agreement, even though they're not in their minds thinking, hey, we're in the process of creating agreement right now. Some negotiations are obvious and they are named negotiations, and others are not. It's one thing to say, and now we're going to talk about closing dates, right? That would be naming a negotiation on one specific topic. That would be trying to reach an agreement on closing dates. But both named and unnamed agreements happen in real estate. But in many ways, it's the unnamed ones that are more important, especially when you are dealing with off-market sellers who you're meeting with face-to-face. Now, if you're just writing an offer, submitting it to a broker who's submitting it to another broker who's submitting it to a seller, unnamed agreement is not as much a part of the equation because you can't even really have a dance with that other person, that seller, because you're not even seeing them. But in off-market real estate acquisition, the unnamed agreements are often most important and more important. They are states of agreement, not noun agreements. And I would argue that the more skilled you are at negotiation, the fewer of your overall negotiations are named agreements and named negotiations. The fewer of them become named negotiations. And in other words, then, the more state of agreement that you create, the easier it is to get the noun agreements that you need to have. Let me give you just a couple quick examples of things that probably do not really feel like negotiation to you at all. Until today, that is, when you become conscious of this. Now, when I go to a seller's house for the first time and they let me in, what I do is I always pause at the door and I say, "Would you like me to take my shoes off?" Now, regardless of their answer, do you know what we've just agreed on? We have just agreed that Jeff is a considerate person. What does that agreement do? It makes the seller predisposed to view the rest of what I have to offer ultimately as being considerate as well, because I demonstrated to them that I was a considerate person. And in that moment, subconsciously, of course, they didn't stop and go, "Oh, what a considerate person. Let me write that down on my notebook." That's what they logged, though, a sense of agreement between us mutually that Jeff is a considerate person. And that is very powerful for the rest of our conversations and negotiations. Here's another example. When the seller says, "Hey, please go ahead and just email me your offer." And when I respond and I say, "Okay, call me old-fashioned, but I'm a face-to-face kind of guy, and I'd really like to share it with both you and your wife in person. It's important to me that you both know who you're dealing with and that you're both comfortable with that." When I say that, what have we just agreed on? Well, we've just agreed that all of us want to make sure that everybody involved in our conversation is comfortable with that conversation and comfortable with the deal. What does that agreement do? If we've come to agreement, a state of alignment on that topic, even subconsciously, that we all want to make sure that we are all comfortable with the deal, what does that agreement do? I'll tell you, it's like spraying WD-40 on the rest of the conversation. You've lubricated it, you've decreased the friction, and everything that comes next is going to be so much easier because it's helping people put their guard down because they know that you are in alignment on this particular topic. Now, you haven't reached an agreement. There's nothing for anybody to sign, but you've reached agreement on that important thing. Now, let me give you one more example, which will pivot nicely back to our topic today. When I send a letter and it shows up in their mailbox and it says, "Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a fellow landlord here in town, and I'm looking to buy another property that I can care for myself. If you would ever consider selling your property at 1234 Main Street, I'd love to speak with you about buying it myself." When I send them that letter and they open it and they read it, what have we agreed on? Well, we've agreed on several things. We've agreed that we are peers because I very clearly in my messaging made that positioning prominent. I said, "I'm a fellow landlord." So we've agreed now, we're peers. Okay. And we've agreed that I know that they're not in a rush. We've agreed that they are not in a rush because I've clearly said, if at any point you would consider selling that property, I'd love to talk with you about it. We have agreed, we're in agreement that they are not in a rush. We are in agreement that they're not in a position where they need to sell. And what does that agreement do? It frames our entire conversation as being one that they would be comfortable being a part of. So much of traditional lowbrow real estate marketing that has a message like we buy houses, fast cash, quick close, all of that carries with it a subconscious subtext of a message that says, hey, we assume you're in a bit of a bind here. We assume you don't have the capability, confidence, or capacity to improve your own property. And we assume that we have leverage in this conversation because you need us worse than we need you. That is the subtext message that is carried there. That's not at all the message that we as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs want to send, because that does not set up the dynamic that we actually want to have. Now, this is a really important point. The way that a person meets you has a huge impact on the rest of your relationship dynamic, has a huge impact on everything that happens downstream. Another way to put that is how they perceive you and who they think you are at the very first moment that they even become aware of you sets the stage for your whole relationship. So let's circle back to Robin. What was our negotiation? When did our negotiation begin? There was no back and forth discussion on price, on terms, on dates, anything like that, earnest money. She just told me what she wanted, and I said, okay. So does that mean that this was a weird situation where there was not a negotiation? No, that's not what that means at all. The negotiation began the minute my letter hit her mailbox, and it continued throughout our email exchanges. Even though we were just staying in touch and not discussing details, I didn't even get her phone number. It continued throughout that email exchange. We created unnamed agreement in that process. Agreement that we were both comfortable with the other person. Agreement that the other person was the type of person that we would be willing and look forward to working with. So by the time that we actually met face to face, it was almost a done deal. We had created so much agreement and alignment between us that we just had to iron out the specifics and make it a more formalized, named agreement. We had to go from a state of agreement to an agreement, which was easy as pie because of all the agreement and alignment we had already achieved. So, go back to our premise question for our episode. When do you start negotiating? Okay, I'll admit it's a little bit of a trick question. I'm not asking, when should you proclaim that the negotiations have begun? Rather, I'm asking, when does the process of negotiating actually start? Whether you are ready for it and you're realizing it's happening or not, when does that process of negotiating actually start? You start negotiating the second your letter hits their mailbox. The second they become aware of you, that negotiation process has begun. And that is why it's so critical that you choose exactly how they become aware of you so carefully. This is not an arbitrary decision. It's not the same if they become aware of you through a bandit sign or through a We Buy Houses postcard or through door knocking or cold calling or a nice direct mail letter that you've sent them. Those all start the relationship off in different ways, and their perception of you in that first second is different with each of those contexts. And that's why we love well-crafted, thoughtful direct mail letters as lead generation tools, not the standard lowbrow We Buy Houses, fast cash, quick close BS. Real letters from real people to other real people with none of that nonsense, just a sincere introduction from one peer to another, expressing a sincere interest to discuss the sale of their property whenever the time is right for them. Now, the first step, of course, is you got to know who to market to. Don't let this be a roadblock for you. I understand how it can be, but it doesn't need to be at all. And that's why recently we wrote this free report called How to Get a Targeted Quality List of Off-Market Seller Leads Without Spending a Dime. You can get the free report at www.sellerdirectmail.com. And from that, you'll learn, of course, how to get that list, but you'll learn more about the thought process behind the list and the overall strategy for marketing that we use as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. Thank you for listening to Sleaze Free Real Estate Investing. On the next episode, we're going to continue this discussion about further elements of the strategy of direct mail marketing and the thought process, the rationale behind it, because it's more than stamps and paper and ink. I'll tell you that, as you can already start to understand. It's a much bigger, more strategic approach. Again, please do yourself a big favor. Do us a huge favor by hitting the subscribe button. Just do it right now, please, in your podcast app, so you'll know that the next second that episode is released. A reminder, as always, the show notes, including a transcript, is available at thoughtfulre.com/E25. And until next time, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off. Hey there, thoughtful real estate entrepreneur. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to talk to you for just a second about marketing, because you can't buy properties unless you have leads of properties and sellers who are considering selling those properties. As you know, we as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs love off-market deals. We love face-to-face negotiations with sellers, because that's where we know we can absolutely have the best shot at creating a tailored win-win negotiation with the seller. But the question is, where do the leads come from? Well, as we like to do it here at the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur, it's direct mail letters. But you can't send letters unless you know who to send letters to. That's why I created a free PDF report for you to download right now called How to Get a Targeted, Ready-to-Use List of Quality Off-Market Seller Leads Without Spending a Dime. In this free report, you will learn the 3 simple steps to get the perfect list at no cost to you at all. And let's be honest, because we're thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, we will also explain to you why this strategy and this technique works the way it does. To get this free report immediately, just go to sellerdirectmail.com and you can grab it. Just enter your email address and we'll email it to you absolutely immediately. Now on to today's episode.
Thanks for listening to Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.